The encounter. The restaurant buzzed with the familiar hum of clinking glasses, whispered conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter from well-dressed patrons. Lales, an upscale dining establishment, was a hub for the elite, a place where the rich and influential gathered to flaunt their power over fine dining and premium wines. In this world of sophistication, Lena Brooks, a 28-year-old waitress, moved gracefully between tables, balancing plates with skill honed through years of hard work. Lena wasn't new to the challenges of working in such an environment. She knew what it meant to serve wealthy patrons who viewed people like her as mere servants. Every day, she faced subtle insults and dismissive attitudes, her strength and resilience tested at every turn. As a single mother, Lena carried the weight of her world on her shoulders. She worked double shifts to support her young son, Miles, hoping to one day save enough money to open her own small cafe. As she approached the table where James Carter sat, Lena took a deep breath. James was a regular at Lales, a powerful millionaire known for his ruthlessness in business and arrogance in his interactions. He demanded nothing less than perfection and had a reputation for treating the staff with an attitude that bordered on cruelty. Tonight, he was hosting a group of associates, laughing heartily at some inside joke that left his companions chuckling obediently. "Excuse me, sir," Lena said politely as she refilled his glass, keeping her tone professional and her posture respectful. James didn't bother to look up. He barely acknowledged her presence, even as she carefully set his glass back down. Then, as she was about to leave, he waved his hand dismissively. "Wait, don't go yet," he commanded, his voice laced with entitlement. He reached across the table, grabbing a bottle of chili sauce that had been set out with the appetizers. Lena watched, confusion flickering in her eyes, as James uncapped the bottle and examined it with a critical eye. "You call this service?" he scoffed, glancing at her with disdain. "This is the worst meal I've had here. Do you even care about your job?" Lena felt a pang of embarrassment as the other patrons turned to watch. She wanted to explain, to assure him that she had done her best, but James wasn't looking for answers. With a sneer, he tilted the bottle toward her and, without warning, squeezed it, sending a stream of fiery red sauce splattering across her face. The restaurant fell silent. Every eye was on them, as Lena stood frozen, her face stinging from both the sauce and the humiliation. She could feel the hot liquid dripping down her cheeks, her skin tingling with the intense spice. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation of being treated like an object for someone's amusement. James leaned back, crossing his arms as a smug smile crept onto his face. "Maybe that will teach you to pay attention," he sneered, his voice cutting through the silence. His companions laughed uncomfortably, some of them shifting in their seats, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to say anything against the man who held the power in that room. Lena took a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she wiped the sauce from her face. She looked around, searching for support from her colleagues or even the manager, but no one dared to meet her gaze. She could see the pity in their eyes, the silent apologies that did nothing to ease her pain. Her humiliation was complete, yet no one dared to stand up for her. In that moment, something shifted within Lena. She'd endured years of mistreatment, biting her tongue and swallowing her pride to keep her job and provide for her son. But this was different. This was beyond the daily microaggressions and subtle dismissals. James had humiliated her publicly, reducing her to an object of ridicule in front of an audience. As she stared at the man who had thrown sauce in her face without a hint of remorse, a quiet resolve began to form in her heart. She realized that this moment could either break her or make her stronger. She refused to let him strip away her dignity without a fight. Without another word, Lena turned on her heel and walked briskly to the restroom, ignoring the curious stares and hushed whispers that followed her. She splashed water on her face, her reflection staring back at her with a mixture of anger, pain, and determination. She knew that if she didn't take a stand now, she'd be forever haunted by this moment. But what could she do? James was a powerful man with influence that extended far beyond the walls of the restaurant. She was just a waitress, invisible in his eyes, disposable in the grand scheme of his life. Yet, as she gazed at herself in the mirror, she knew she couldn't remain silent. She needed justice, not only for herself but for every person who had ever been humiliated and dismissed by people like James. A plan began to form in her mind, a plan that would require courage, resilience, and the support of others who were willing to stand up for what was right. She wouldn't fight James alone. She would find allies, people who understood the pain of injustice and the power of unity. As she took one last look at herself in the mirror, Lena felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about one man's cruelty. It was about challenging a system that allowed people like James to thrive at the expense of others. She would rise above this moment, stronger than ever, and she would make sure that James Carter would regret the day he decided to throw chili sauce in her face. With her head held high, Lena stepped out of the restroom, ready to face the storm she was about to unleash. Little did James know, he had just ignited a fire within her, a fire that would burn brighter and stronger than anything he could ever imagine. This was the beginning of a battle, and Lena was prepared to fight with every ounce of strength she possessed. Gathering allies. As Lena re-entered the restaurant floor, the air felt charged, tense, as if everyone was waiting for her to crumble or retaliate. She could feel the heat of embarrassment lingering on her skin, and her heart still raced with the sting of the assault. But she held her head high, refusing to show any sign of defeat. Each step she took felt heavier, but with each step, her resolve strengthened. She wasn't just enduring this for herself. She was enduring it for every person who had ever been humiliated or dismissed by someone in a position of power. As she returned to her duties, Lena noticed sympathetic glances from a few of her coworkers. Samantha, a fellow waitress and one of the few people Lena trusted, approached her cautiously. Her usually cheerful face was marred with a look of concern and anger. "Lena, are you okay?" she whispered, placing a gentle hand on Lena's shoulder. Lena offered a small nod, trying to muster a smile. "I'll survive," she replied, her voice steady but her eyes betraying the turmoil within. "But I can't just let this go, Sam. Not this time." Samantha glanced nervously at James's table, where the millionaire was now engrossed in conversation, laughing and chatting as if nothing had happened. "I get it," she said, her voice hushed. "That was beyond cruel. He acts like he owns everyone here. But Lena, what can you really do? Richard won't support you. You know how he is about his valuable customers." Richard Saunders, the restaurant owner, was an old-school businessman who had known James for years. To him, maintaining his wealthy clientele was paramount. The complaints of a waitress meant nothing in comparison to the business that James and his associates brought to Lales. "I know Richard won't back me," Lena admitted, her eyes narrowing as she watched James from a distance. "But that doesn't mean I have to stand alone." Samantha's eyes softened. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "You know I have your back. Whatever you need, just tell me. But Lena, be careful. People like James don't think twice about using their power to ruin lives." "Maybe so," Lena replied, her gaze fixed on James's smug expression. "But he's not invincible. People like him get away with this because no one stands up to them. Maybe it's time someone did." Samantha nodded, though her face was a mixture of fear and admiration. "Just tell me what you need." As the night wore on, Lena quietly went about her tasks, her mind spinning with ideas. She had no desire to resort to violence or make a scene. Instead, she thought about how she could gather people who would stand by her, people who would see James Carter for who he really was and wouldn't be intimidated by his wealth and connections. The restaurant's kitchen was bustling with activity as usual, and Lena knew she had allies there. The chefs and kitchen staff, mostly immigrants and people of color, had often shared stories with her about enduring the disrespect and subtle racism from the wealthy patrons. They were hard workers, People who poured their souls into their craft only to be looked down upon by those who saw themselves as superior. During her break, Lena slipped into the kitchen and found Carlos, the head chef, chopping vegetables with his characteristic focus and precision. He was a middle-aged man with a kind heart and a passion for food. Carlos had once told Lena about the struggles he had faced as an immigrant, how he had clawed his way up in a world that saw him as expendable. "Carlos," Lena began, her voice hesitant but determined, "can we talk?" Carlos looked up, concern etched in his face as he noticed the red stains on her blouse and the slight redness around her eyes. "Lena, what happened? Are you okay?" She sighed, nodding. "I'll be fine, but something happened with a customer tonight. James Carter. He threw chili sauce in my face, Carlos. Right in front of everyone. And no one did anything." Carlos's face darkened. He put down his knife, leaning against the counter as he listened. "That man is poison," he muttered, shaking his head. "I've seen him treat people terribly. He thinks his money makes him untouchable." Lena nodded, feeling a spark of hope. "Exactly. And it's time someone stood up to him. I can't do it alone. But if I had support, if I knew people had my back, maybe we could finally make him see that his actions have consequences." Carlos crossed his arms, a look of determination hardening his features. "Lena, you're right. He's walked over us for too long. I'm with you. But you know it won't be easy. People will be scared to stand up to him. Richard won't protect you. He'll protect his business." "Then we won't ask Richard for help," Lena replied. "If he wants to protect his profits over his people, then we'll go over his head. I'm not asking for a revolution. I just want him to know that he can't treat us like we're disposable." A few other kitchen staff members had gathered around, listening quietly. Maria, a young prep cook who had faced her own share of racial insults, stepped forward. "I'm with you too, Lena. People like him, they never think we'll fight back. They think we're too scared. But if we all stand together." The other staff members murmured in agreement, nodding and exchanging determined glances. Lena felt a swell of gratitude and pride. These people weren't just coworkers, they were family. They had all endured struggles and indignities that the patrons at Lales couldn't even begin to imagine. And now, they were ready to fight for their dignity, for their right to be treated with respect. Lena smiled, her heart full. "Thank you, all of you. I don't know exactly what the plan is yet, but I'm going to make sure James Carter knows that he messed with the wrong person." As her shift ended, Lena walked out of the restaurant with her head held high, surrounded by her coworkers who had promised to stand by her. She felt a sense of power she hadn't felt in years, a power that came not from wealth or connections, but from solidarity, from the strength of people who had been underestimated and overlooked. But as she walked toward her car, a figure emerged from the shadows near the edge of the parking lot. Detective Erica Lawson, tall and imposing with an air of authority, stepped forward, her sharp gaze fixed on Lena. Lena had noticed Erica in the restaurant earlier, speaking with some of the staff, but she hadn't had the chance to ask why the detective was there. "Ms. Brooks." Erica's voice was steady, calm, yet it held an underlying intensity. "Do you have a moment?" Lena paused, studying Erica's face. She sensed that the detective wasn't here by accident. "Yes, detective. What can I do for you?" Erica stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I understand you had an incident with James Carter tonight." Lena's pulse quickened. She hadn't expected anyone outside the restaurant to take an interest in what had happened, let alone a detective. "Yes. How did you know?" Erica's gaze was piercing, a look of quiet determination in her eyes. "I've been investigating James Carter for a while now. He's been involved in some shady business dealings, and it's only a matter of time before his empire starts to crumble. But I need help, people who are willing to speak out, people who have seen the kind of man he really is." Lena felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of opportunity she hadn't anticipated. "Are you saying you want my help?" Erica nodded. You're not alone, Lena. People like James Carter think they can walk over others because they believe no one will ever stand up to them. But if enough of us come together, if we're willing to speak out, we can bring him down. Lena looked into Erica's eyes, feeling the weight of the decision before her. This was more than just standing up to a bully. It was a chance to expose a man who had harmed countless people in his pursuit of power and wealth. And with a quiet nod, Lena accepted the challenge. She was no longer just a waitress who had been humiliated. She was a woman ready to fight, to seek justice not just for herself, but for everyone James had ever hurt. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. The spark of resistance. The next morning, Lena sat at her small kitchen table, sipping a cup of strong coffee as she gathered her thoughts. Her son, Miles, was still asleep in the next room, his soft breathing the only sound breaking the early morning silence. Lena glanced at the clock. She didn't have much time before she had to start her day, but her mind was racing with everything that had happened the night before. Detective Erica Lawson was seated inconspicuously in the corner of the dining room, posing as a regular patron. She wore a sleek black dress, her hair pinned back, with a quiet and composed air that matched the upscale ambience. To anyone else, she looked like just another diner enjoying a night out, but Lena knew better. Erica's eyes missed nothing, her attention focused as she prepared to observe the evening's events. As the dinner service began, James Carter walked into the restaurant, exuding his usual aura of smug self-importance. He was dressed in an expensive tailored suit, his every step a proclamation of his perceived superiority. He greeted Richard Saunders with a hearty handshake and a condescending pat on the back, laughing loudly as he spoke, oblivious to the stares of disdain from the staff. Richard, completely unaware of the brewing confrontation, welcomed James with open arms. They exchanged pleasantries, and Richard led him to his usual table near the center of the room, a position that would give everyone a clear view of him. Lena clenched her fists as she watched him settle in, her stomach twisting with a mixture of nerves and anger. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The plan was simple, yet devastatingly effective. Provoke James into revealing his true nature. To achieve this, Lena and her colleagues needed to create a scenario in which his entitlement and contempt would be fully unleashed. Erica had coached Lena on how to handle the interaction, advising her on subtle ways to hold her ground without outright defiance. Just enough to stoke his frustration, just enough to let his mask slip. Lena approached his table, her expression carefully neutral. She could feel her heart pounding, but she kept her voice steady as she greeted him. "Good evening, Mr. Carter. Would you like to start with your usual drink?" James barely looked up, his attention focused on his phone. "Actually, bring me a scotch, but make sure it's the 25-year-old Macallan," he replied dismissively, waving his hand as if she were an annoyance. Lena nodded, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. She turned to retrieve his drink, deliberately taking her time as she made her way to the bar. Samantha passed by, her face set with determination. "You ready for this?" she whispered. Lena nodded, feeling the surge of courage, as ready as I'll ever be. Returning to James's table, Lena placed the scotch in front of him, careful not to spill a drop. But as she leaned forward to set the glass down, James's gaze suddenly sharpened, his eyes narrowing in what looked like irritation. "Are you deaf?" he sneered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I asked for this 5 minutes ago. Do you think I have all night?" Lena felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she held her ground, her voice calm. "Apologies for the wait, Mr. Carter. We strive for quality, not haste." James let out a derisive laugh, leaning back in his chair. "Quality? Please. You wouldn't know quality if it hit you in the face. Honestly, they'll let anyone work here these days, won't they?" A hush fell over the tables nearby, patrons casting glances toward James and Lena. Erica watched from her corner, her gaze steady, ready to step in if things escalated too far. Lena could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, but she stood firm, refusing to look away. With practiced composure, she replied. "We work hard to serve everyone here, Mr. Carter. Respect is all we ask in return." James's face twisted in disdain, his voice dripping with contempt. "Respect? Don't make me laugh. You think you deserve respect. You're a waitress. You're here to serve people like me, not to demand anything." Lena met his gaze, her voice barely a whisper but firm enough to be heard. "Being wealthy doesn't give you the right to degrade others, Mr. Carter. We all have value, regardless of our position." For a moment, there was a stunned silence. James looked taken aback, as if he couldn't believe that she'd spoken to him that way. His eyes flashed with anger, his face reddening as he sputtered, "How dare you speak to me like that?" The quiet murmur of the restaurant grew louder as patrons exchanged whispers. Richard Saunders, alerted by the commotion, rushed over to the table, his face a mixture of confusion and alarm. "Is everything all right here, James?" he asked, glancing nervously between Lena and his wealthy patron. James turned to Richard, pointing a shaking finger at Lena. "I want her fired, Richard. Right now. She thinks she can talk back to me like this. In my own restaurant." Richard looked flustered, his loyalty clearly torn between his most valued customer and his own sense of fairness. But before he could respond, Detective Erica Lawson rose from her table, her authoritative voice cutting through the tension. The group dispersed, each person returning to their tasks with a renewed sense of purpose. Over the next few days, they began gathering evidence in subtle, careful ways. Carlos started keeping a notebook in his apron, jotting down the things he overheard, the comments made by management about the staff's lack of professionalism or inability to handle upscale clients. Maria began discreetly recording conversations with her phone, capturing moments when customers like James Carter spoke to them with blatant disrespect. Samantha, though nervous, found her own way to contribute. She began speaking with other waitstaff, not just at Lales but at nearby restaurants where similar dynamics played out. She gathered their stories, creating a broader picture of the exploitation and racism that ran rampant in the industry. Each story added weight to their cause, each piece of evidence another step toward justice. One afternoon, Lena found herself alone in the dining area, wiping down tables after the lunch rush. She was lost in thought, focused on her work, when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Richard Saunders approaching, his expression unreadable. Lena tensed, bracing herself. She hadn't expected him to confront her so soon. "Lena," Richard began, his voice smooth and calculated. "I've noticed you and some of the other staff have been unusually cooperative lately. Is there something I should know about?" Lena forced a calm smile, her heart pounding. "We're just trying to do our jobs, Richard. Isn't that what you want?" Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, a hint of suspicion creeping into his gaze. "Of course. But remember, Lena, this isn't just any restaurant. Our clientele expects a certain standard of service, and I'd hate to think anyone here was unhappy." Lena held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "We all want the best for Lales, Richard, but respect goes both ways. We can't be expected to uphold a standard that isn't reciprocated." Richard's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he regained his composure. "Just remember where you are, Lena. People in your position don't always get second chances." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Lena standing alone in the empty dining room. She felt a chill run down her spine, but she quickly shook it off. She knew Richard was trying to scare her, to remind her of her place, but she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. Her coworkers had her back, and with Erica's investigation underway, they had a real chance to bring about change. As she finished her shift, Lena gathered her things and headed for the exit, her mind focused on the task ahead. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but she felt a strength she hadn't known before. The power of solidarity, of knowing she was fighting not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been mistreated or overlooked, gave her the courage to keep going. When she reached her car, she found Detective Erica Lawson waiting, leaning casually against the hood with a serious but encouraging expression. "Detective." Lena greeted her, surprised but relieved to see a friendly face. Erica straightened, nodding at her. "I wanted to check in, see how things are going. I heard about your plan to document everything. It's smart, Lena. Really smart." Lena smiled, a flicker of pride lighting her face. "Thank you. We're trying to be careful, but we're not backing down. We're ready to make a stand." Erica's eyes softened with admiration. "Good. People like James Carter rely on fear and silence, but you're proving that courage is stronger. When you're ready to take this to the next level, you know where to find me." As Erica walked away, Lena felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just a battle for justice anymore. It was a fight for respect, for dignity, for the right to be seen as equals in a world that too often overlooked them. And Lena knew, deep in her heart, that they were going to win. A silent revolution. The following days at Lales felt charged with an unspoken energy. Lena and her fellow staff members moved through their shifts with a purpose that was as subtle as it was resolute. They continued to collect evidence, documenting every degrading comment, every dismissive gesture, and every act of prejudice, knowing that each moment they captured added strength to their cause. In the kitchen, Carlos and Maria worked seamlessly, their usual camaraderie laced with a newfound determination. Lena saw them exchanging looks as they prepared dishes, a silent reminder of their shared mission. Samantha, though quieter than the others, was equally dedicated. She had started reaching out to servers at other high-end restaurants, gathering stories and piecing together a pattern of abuse and discrimination that extended beyond Lales. Detective Erica Lawson had given them the tools and the encouragement they needed, but this movement was theirs. Lena realized that it wasn't just about taking down James Carter. It was about reclaiming their dignity in an environment designed to strip it away. They were standing up for themselves in a way that felt dangerous yet exhilarating. The risk was real, but so was their resolve. One evening, as the dinner service began to pick up, Lena found herself assigned to James Carter's table once again. His reservations at Lales were a routine affair, and his presence never failed to cast a dark shadow over her shift. Each time he entered, Lena could feel the weight of his disdain, the silent reminder of their power imbalance. James sat at his usual table, scrolling through his phone with an air of casual indifference. His fingers tapped against the table impatiently, a sign that he was in one of his usual foul moods. Lena approached him, keeping her face neutral, her posture poised. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Would you like your usual tonight?" James looked up, his gaze sharp and dismissive. His eyes flickered with that familiar look of contempt, but Lena stood her ground, refusing to shrink beneath it. He didn't respond right away, his mouth twisting into a smirk as he leaned back in his chair. "Actually, I think I'll try something different tonight," he replied, his tone dripping with condescension. "Surprise me, Miss Brooks, isn't it?" Lena nodded, hiding her irritation as she scribbled down his vague request. As she walked back to the kitchen, she felt a surge of anger, but she reminded herself of the bigger picture. This was about more than just one man's disdain. It was about exposing the rot that allowed people like him to treat others with such casual cruelty. When she entered the kitchen, Carlos glanced up, noticing the tension in her expression. "Carter again?" he asked, his voice low. Lena nodded, letting out a frustrated sigh. "He's playing his usual games, acting like he owns the place." Carlos's eyes hardened. Let him play his games. He doesn't realize that he's the one being watched now. Lena smiled at Carlos's words, the reminder lifting her spirits. It was true. James Carter was oblivious to the fact that his every move was being noted, every insult cataloged. He believed himself untouchable, a man immune to consequence. But the truth was, they were building a case against him, and he was too arrogant to realize it. Throughout the night, James continued to push boundaries. He snapped his fingers to get Lena's attention, spoke to her as if she were beneath him, and made a series of backhanded comments that she recorded in her mind, knowing she would relay them to Erica later. It was a familiar routine, one that might have broken her spirit in the past. But tonight, Lena felt something different, a quiet power that came from knowing she was no longer alone. As the evening wound down, Lena noticed Richard Saunders, the restaurant's owner, watching her from across the room. His expression was guarded, his eyes tracking her movements with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She knew he was aware of the subtle shift among the staff, the whispers and exchanged glances that had started since her confrontation with James. Richard approached her just as she was clearing a table, his smile thin and calculated. "Lena," he began smoothly, his voice laced with insincerity. "A word, if you don't mind." Lena set down the stack of dishes she was holding, meeting his gaze with a calmness that surprised even her. "Of course, Mr. Saunders." They walked to a quiet corner of the restaurant, away from the other staff and patrons. Richard crossed his arms, regarding her with a look that was both condescending and vaguely amused. "I've noticed a change in the atmosphere here lately," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "It seems some of the staff are becoming a bit too comfortable, wouldn't you say?" Lena met his gaze, refusing to back down. "We're all just trying to do our jobs, Mr. Saunders. Respect goes both ways." Richard's smile tightened. "I see. Just remember, Lena, you're here to serve our guests, not to make statements. This restaurant has a reputation to uphold, and I would hate for any misunderstandings to jeopardize that." It was a veiled threat, one that Lena had heard many times before in different forms. But this time, it didn't intimidate her. She looked Richard squarely in the eyes, her voice steady and unyielding. "Understood, Mr. Saunders. But remember, respect is a two-way street, and there are laws about the treatment of employees. I'm sure you wouldn't want any misunderstandings on your end either." Richard's face reddened slightly, but he quickly masked his irritation. "Just do your job, Lena. That's all I'm asking." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Lena standing alone. She felt a surge of satisfaction, a sense that she had stood her ground in a way she hadn't dared to before. Richard Saunders might own the restaurant, but he didn't own her spirit. The following day, Lena met with Detective Erica Lawson in a quiet park near the restaurant. They sat on a bench, their voices low as they discussed the progress Lena and her coworkers had made. Erica listened intently as Lena recounted the latest incidents, her pen scratching across her notepad. "This is good, Lena," Erica said, nodding as she flipped through her notes. "You're building a solid case. With enough evidence, we'll have a clear record of Carter's behavior, not just toward you, but toward everyone he's mistreated." Lena felt a surge of hope. "What's the next step?" Erica paused, her expression thoughtful. "We need a way to expose him publicly, a way that makes it impossible for him to deny what he's done. Right now, he has his reputation, his wealth, his connections. But if we can show people who he really is, he won't be able to hide behind those things anymore." A spark of an idea formed in Lena's mind. What if we bring it to light in the restaurant? In front of everyone he tries so hard to impress. Erica raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What are you thinking?" Lena leaned forward, her voice steady, but charged with determination. "We stage a situation where he reveals his true colors. We give him an opportunity to show that contempt, that entitlement, and we make sure there are witnesses, people who matter to him." Erica considered this, a slow smile spreading across her face. "It's risky, but it could work. People like him hate being exposed, especially in front of their peers. If he lashes out publicly, it'll be hard for him to explain it away." They spent the next hour planning, outlining every detail of the confrontation they hoped to orchestrate. Lena knew it would require careful coordination with her coworkers, a collective effort that would demand courage and commitment. But as they finalized the plan, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just a fight for herself. It was a fight for everyone who had ever been treated as invisible, as expendable. The stage was set, and Lena knew that when the moment came, they would all be ready. James Carter had ruled with impunity for too long, but his reign was about to end. Together, they would expose him for what he was, and in doing so, they would reclaim the dignity and respect that he had tried so hard to strip away. As Lena walked away from the meeting with Erica, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She was no longer just a waitress, no longer just a single mother struggling to get by. She was part of something bigger, a movement that was rooted in justice and resilience. For the first time in a long time, Lena felt truly powerful, and she knew that no matter what happened next, she would never go back to the person she had been before. She was ready to fight, to stand up, and to make sure that people like James Carter could no longer operate in the shadows. The plan in motion. The restaurant buzzed with its usual air of quiet sophistication, a place where the wealthy came to enjoy their meals in the glow of opulence and exclusivity. Tonight, however, there was an undercurrent of anticipation among the staff, an unspoken agreement that hung in the air like the charged silence before a storm. Lena stood at her station, going over the plan in her mind for what felt like the 100th time. She had coordinated with Erica, Carlos, Samantha, and the other staff members who were all willing to take a stand. Each of them played a specific role, each tasked with positioning themselves in strategic areas of the restaurant to ensure that, when the moment came, they would all bear witness. And so with the patrons. Richard Saunders, the owner, was unaware of the quiet rebellion brewing within his own establishment, and that was precisely how they intended to keep it. The idea had been to expose James Carter not just in front of his wealthy friends, but in front of anyone who held even a shred of respect for him. The goal was to shatter the illusion of his untouchable authority and lay bare the cruelty he so carefully concealed behind wealth and influence. As Lena arranged plates and polished glasses, she caught Carlos's eye from across the room. He nodded, a small but reassuring gesture that reminded her they were in this together. Samantha, usually timid and reserved, moved with newfound purpose. Every time she passed Lena, she would subtly brush her hand over her heart, a silent message that said, "I'm with you." Detective Erica Lawson's words echoed in her mind. The detective had offered Lena something she never thought she'd have, a way to fight back, a real chance to make a difference, not just for herself, but for all the others James Carter had mistreated, exploited, and disregarded. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up against a system that allowed men like him to thrive by keeping everyone else subdued. She had allies now, not just in Erica, but in the kitchen staff at Lales, people like Carlos, Maria, and Samantha, who had rallied behind her. But Lena knew that if they were going to take on someone as powerful as James, they couldn't rely on passion alone. They needed a plan, something that would send a message but wouldn't risk them losing their livelihoods before they even had a chance to make their voices heard. After getting Miles ready and dropping him off at school, Lena made her way to Lales for her shift, her mind still spinning with ideas. As soon as she stepped through the back entrance, she felt the tension in the air. The staff who had overheard what happened the previous night were watching her, their faces showing a mix of sympathy and cautious hope. James Carter's actions had stirred something in all of them, an anger that had been simmering for too long, waiting for a spark. Carlos was already busy at the stove, but he looked up and gave her a quick nod. Maria approached, handing Lena an apron. "You ready for today?" she asked softly. Lena took a deep breath, tying the apron around her waist. "More than ready," she replied. "But we're going to need everyone on board. This isn't just about me anymore." Maria's face hardened. "You're right. People like him, they get away with it because everyone's too scared to speak up. But if we all stand together," she trailed off, as if she couldn't quite believe it yet. Lena nodded. "We've been letting people like James push us around because we thought we didn't have a choice. But now we do. And if we're smart about this, we can make him see that we're not invisible." They spent the morning in quiet conversation, gathering allies one by one. Each member of the staff had their own story, their own grievances. Carlos had been told he'd never make head chef because he didn't fit the image the restaurant wanted to project. Maria had been passed over for promotions again and again, despite her years of dedication. Even Samantha, who was typically timid and hesitant, spoke up about the subtle ways management belittled and controlled them. The experiences were different, but the underlying cause was the same. A system that devalued them, that treated them as expendable. By the time the lunch rush began, Lena had gathered a small but resolute group. They didn't talk openly about their plans. Instead, they worked quietly, exchanging glances and whispers during brief moments in the kitchen. They knew they had to tread carefully. Richard Saunders, the restaurant owner, wouldn't hesitate to fire anyone he saw as a threat to his business. But Lena had an idea, a way to make their voices heard without putting anyone at immediate risk. They would gather evidence, build a case against James Carter and the culture of abuse he represented. The detective's investigation was already underway, but Lena knew that if she could provide Erica with first-hand accounts, if they could document the harassment, the intimidation, and the hostile work environment, they could strengthen the case against him. They didn't need to take drastic action all at once. They just needed to create a record, something that would make it impossible for him to deny what he had done. That night, as the last of the customers filtered out and the restaurant began to quiet down, Lena gathered her small group in the kitchen. They stood in a tight circle, their faces a mix of determination and anxiety. Lena felt a wave of gratitude as she looked at each of them. They were risking a lot to stand with her. "Thank you, all of you," Lena began, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I know this isn't easy, but if we do this together, we can make a difference. We can show people like James Carter that they can't treat us like this anymore." Carlos nodded, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "You have our support, Lena. Just tell us what we need to do." Lena took a deep breath. "We're going to document everything. Every insult, every act of intimidation, every time they treat us like we're beneath them. And when the time is right, we'll take it all to Erica." Maria's eyes sparkled with hope. "You really think this will work?" Lena nodded. "I do. It's not going to be easy, and it's going to take time. But if we stay united, if we don't let them scare us, we can make sure they're held accountable." "Mr. Saunders," she said, striding over with a calm, commanding presence, "I think it's important to understand what's happening here." Richard blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Excuse me, and who might you be?" "Detective Erica Lawson, LAPD," she replied smoothly, flashing her badge. "I've been investigating certain illegal activities connected to Mr. Carter's business dealings, and I've been observing how he treats the people he considers beneath him." The room went silent as everyone stared at Erica, the revelation settling like a cold weight over the patrons. James's face drained of color, his confident facade cracking for the first time. You can't be serious," he stammered, trying to maintain his composure. "This is preposterous." Erica's gaze was unyielding. "I assure you, Mr. Carter, I'm quite serious. We've been gathering evidence of your actions for months, and your behavior here tonight only reinforces what we already know. People like you think you can mistreat others without consequence, but that ends now." Lena watched as the color drained from James's face, a wave of satisfaction washing over her. The once arrogant man now looked small, his bravado stripped away by the quiet authority of the detective standing before him. As Erica continued to speak, Lena felt a sense of closure, a realization that they had won, not just for themselves but for everyone who had ever been oppressed, dismissed, or treated as invisible. James Carter would finally face the consequences of his actions, his reign of unchecked power brought to an end. The patrons, once silent witnesses, began to murmur in agreement, nodding at Erica's words. It was clear that the people who had once ignored his behavior now saw him for who he truly was. Richard Saunders, watching his prized customer crumble, realized too late that he had aligned himself with the wrong side. In that moment, Lena understood that this was more than a victory. It was a revolution of dignity, justice served, and a new beginning. As the truth of James Carter's misdeeds rippled through the restaurant, an air of stunned disbelief settled over everyone present. The once intimidating businessman, who had spent years using his wealth and influence to silence those he deemed beneath him, now found himself in the very spotlight he had always controlled. But this time, the narrative was no longer his to dictate. Detective Erica Lawson stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Carter, you are hereby advised to remain seated. There are some questions that need answering, not just about your behavior here tonight, but about the deeper issues our investigation has uncovered. You've exploited, manipulated, and degraded people, and tonight is just the beginning of your reckoning." James, pale and visibly shaken, tried to recover his composure. He sneered, attempting to downplay the situation. "Do you have any idea who I am? You'll regret this. I have friends in high places, detective. One phone call, and your career is over." Erica met his gaze with unflinching resolve, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Mr. Carter, I suggest you save your threats. They won't serve you well this time. And as for your friends in high places, some of them are already cooperating with my department. So let's just say the safety net you've grown accustomed to has holes, big enough for you to slip right through." The patrons exchanged shocked glances, watching as the invincible James Carter was brought to heel in front of their eyes. Richard Saunders, the restaurant owner who had long been in James's pocket, shifted uncomfortably, his face pale as he realized the depth of his complicity. For years, he'd turned a blind eye to James's treatment of his staff, prioritizing profit over people, but tonight, that decision had come back to haunt him. Lena stood nearby, a sense of vindication settling over her. This moment was about so much more than a single incident. It was about years of silent resilience in the face of systemic injustice. Tonight, she was not just an employee in a high-end restaurant. She was a person who mattered, whose voice and experiences demanded to be heard. Erica nodded to Lena, signaling her silent approval. They had agreed that Lena would be given a chance to share her story, a chance to voice the quiet agony of those who worked tirelessly, only to be treated with disdain and cruelty. Taking a deep breath, Lena stepped forward. She spoke in a voice that was steady, though laced with emotion, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. "Mr. Carter has spent years treating people like me as if we're nothing. I've been humiliated, insulted, and disregarded just because I serve tables, just because I don't have the wealth or status that he does. But tonight, that ends. I'm not here to be a victim. I'm here to reclaim my dignity." The restaurant remained silent, captivated by Lena's strength and conviction. Her words carried the weight of years of endured hardship, speaking not just for herself, but for countless others who had been treated as invisible by those in power. She continued, "I work hard every day, not just for myself but for my son. I teach him that people deserve respect, no matter who they are or where they come from. But people like James Carter, people who think money makes them untouchable, they don't understand that respect is something you earn, not something you demand." A ripple of quiet applause began to spread across the room, patrons moved by Lena's courage. Richard Saunders, his face awash with shame, attempted to interject, but Erica held up a hand, silencing him. "Mr. Saunders," she said, "I suggest you listen. You might learn something about what true respect looks like." Lena took a steadying breath before delivering the final part of her message. "This restaurant has been a place where the wealthy come to flaunt their power, but it's built on the hard work of people like me and my colleagues, people who deserve to be treated with dignity. Mr. Carter may think he's untouchable, but tonight proves that no one is above accountability." As her word hung in the air, James let out a bitter laugh, his voice laced with desperation. "You think this changes anything? People like you always end up where you started, at the bottom." Without missing a beat, Lena responded, her tone calm but filled with quiet defiance. "Maybe you're right, Mr. Carter. Maybe we don't have the same privileges, But there's one thing we have that you never will: integrity. And tonight, that's worth more than all the money in the world." The applause grew louder, and for the first time, James looked truly defeated. The facade of arrogance and entitlement that he had worn so confidently now lay in ruins, shattered by the strength of the very people he had always underestimated. Detective Lawson approached him, her voice firm. "Mr. Carter, we're taking you in for questioning. We have enough evidence to dig much deeper into your activities, both personal and professional. It's over." As she led James toward the door, a hush fell over the room once more. Lena watched as he left, feeling a mix of relief and empowerment. For so long, she had carried the weight of powerlessness, but tonight, she had reclaimed her voice. Once James was out of sight, Richard Saunders turned to Lena, his face a mask of regret. "Lena, I didn't know." She met his gaze, her expression resolute. "You knew, Mr. Saunders. You just chose not to see it. But tonight, everyone saw the truth. This place needs to change." Richard nodded, chastened, and Lena could see a flicker of genuine remorse in his eyes. "You're right," he admitted, his voice thick with guilt. "I allowed this to happen because I was afraid of losing business, but I was wrong. I'll make things right, Lena. You have my word." Lena nodded, recognizing the weight of his promise. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but tonight had set something in motion. A shift in the balance of power, a recognition of the dignity that belonged to every person who worked within those walls. As the evening wound down, Lena stepped outside, breathing in the cool night air. The stars above twinkled in the vast sky, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced down a man who wielded power like a weapon, and in doing so, she had found her own strength. The following day, news of James Carter's public humiliation and subsequent arrest spread across social media and news outlets. His fall from grace became a symbol of justice served, a reminder that even the most powerful could be held accountable. The story of the waitress who had stood up to a millionaire inspired people across the city, sparking conversations about respect, dignity, and the strength of the human spirit. In the weeks that followed, Lena continued her work at the restaurant, but everything felt different. Richard had kept his word, implementing changes to ensure that every employee felt respected and valued. New training programs were established, and a culture of equality and accountability began to take root. One evening, as Lena finished her shift, she noticed a message on her phone from Detective Lawson. It was a simple note, but it spoke volumes. "Thank you for your courage. You've made a difference that will ripple far beyond that restaurant. People are listening." Lena smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She had started this journey as a waitress just trying to make ends meet, but now she knew that she was so much more. She was a force for change, a voice for those who had been silenced, and a reminder that dignity was a right, not a privilege. As she walked home that night, the weight of past hardships seemed to lift, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. Lena knew that there would always be people like James Carter, people who thought they could take and take without consequence. But she also knew that there would always be people like her, ready to stand up, ready to speak out, and ready to fight for what was right. And as long as there were people willing to fight, there was hope for a better world.